In this recording, we are going to look at how we could add annotations to a particular visualization. And so there are three types of annotations that can be created. A point annotation, an area annotation, and a mark annotation. The way you create an annotation, we'll start with the mark annotation as you go to any particular mark. So again, I'm looking at this viz I created for the bookshop case, where I've created clusters around hours that an author writes per day, the average number of pages they write, and then the size of the marks that you see is in relationship to sales. So if I want to kind of point out this particular mark for Bianca, I can right click on that mark and then click annotate. Then you have the choice of the three different annotations that we can create in Tableau, and I'm going to start off by creating a mark annotation. As soon as you see that, then basically something pops up that looks very familiar, or should look very familiar, similar to like a tooltip dialog box. So I'm going to, just like you could do with tooltips, I'm going to reformat this entirely to say that a particular author wrote a certain number of hours per day, and was able to average a certain number of pages per day, right? And then I'm going to say this resulted in whatever the sales were of their book. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to color code this text to match or as close as possible, because my eyesight is not that great, but I think that's pretty close. Let's see. Let's try this one. That might be better. I think that's better, to match the color of the actual annotation. And then click OK. And now I have an annotation. Now you'll notice that right now it's kind of blocking this particular mark, so I don't want that. So we have the ability to format all of this stuff, as you just saw, and to move it. So to simply move it, I've just clicked on that box, and now I'm just going to drag it to a more emptier space on the visualization and leave it like that. We could do other formatting, and I'll show you that later on once we go through the other marks. The next mark I'm going to show you is a point mark, or a point annotation, excuse me, and this is used, as the name implies, to point to a specific area, mark, but is often used when you have different lines, reference line, demarcation lines, etc. So what I'm going to do is add some trend lines to this visualization, and you can see that I've got the trend line for cluster 3, for cluster 1, and for cluster 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is this annotation for this mark is now covering up that line, so I'm going to go ahead and move it so it's not on the line, and I think I'm going to make it a little narrower rather than wider, and leave it like that, and that actually will allow me to kind of bring it a bit closer. Again, we have control over the shape and the placement of these annotations. Now that I have the three trend lines, let me give you an example of a point annotation. So I'm right clicking within my viz, moving to annotate, and I'm going to choose point. And at this point, pardon the pun there, we have the same thing that we did before in terms of the dialog box. and I am simply going to say that this is cluster number 3 shows an upward slope, which is indicating, let's see if I could talk and type at the same time, that the more hours these, I certainly can't talk and type, these authors spent, or the more hours these authors work, the more average pages they are able to complete. Okay, and again, just to show you, we could format it. Let's again use the same coloring. Now, it just creates this annotation wherever I pointed. That's where I happen to kind of right-click. But what I'm going to do is, number one, move the actual annotation part to the left of the line, and then I'm going to, with my mouse down, move that line so that it is pointing directly at this line. Okay. Oftentimes, when you use a point, you might you might do it for like a demarcation line, where you're pointing to might have some specific meaning. In this case, I'm just pointing to sort of provide additional attention to this trend line. So the next and final type of annotation that we could do is an area. And so what I'm going to try to do, what I'm going to do is create an annotation that basically highlights the yellow or orangish marks for cluster 2. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to right-click, choose Annotate, and in this case I'm going to choose an area, and it starts off the same way with our annotation box, and I'm simply going to type in cluster number 2 consists of authors writing for the least amount of time per day, and consequently have also produced the least amount of average pages, and overall the least sales of their books. Okay, so that's the annotation I want. I'm going to click OK, and you can see it's just stuck it there again. That's where I initially did the right click. So the first thing I'm going to do is just click anywhere within that annotation. You could use any of these green areas to resize this. So I'm going to resize this as closely as I can, so it's covering all of the yellow marks. I'm going to take the text I wrote, and if you notice that little yellow in the center, that's going to allow me to move that mark. I could keep it within this area, or I could place it above it, or I could place it below it. I think actually I'm going to, well, for right now I'll place it below it. If it's covering up marks, I will change it. Now, for right now, you can kind of see what it looks like, and the background color is making it hard, obviously, to see all the marks below it. So let's go ahead and format this. We could format any of these types of annotation: mark annotation, point annotation, or area annotation. And to do that, you just right-click on anywhere within the annotation area and click on Format. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a single edge, and I'm going to change the shading to about 15%, and we'll see how that looks. I'm also going to see if I could scrunch this a little bit, because I don't want to have as much as possible that little blue dot, which is pretty close to that cluster. That's I think as good as I'm going to get. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm noticing that the annotation part is covering up many of the marks, so I'm actually going to drag it and place it right on top of this annotation. The next thing I'm going to do, just to show you, and it's pretty unmeaning, I'm not sure it's doing anything, but I'm going to change the corners, and I am going to add a border. I'm going to make that border a bit thicker, and let's see if I can use, again, I'm pretty bad. I think that's the color for that. And so you can see that now I have this basically demarcation across all the marks representing cluster 3 and an annotation describing that cluster. So some other things that we could format, the line ends. So I'm going to go ahead and right click within the annotation for this pointer. I'm going to click Format, and you'll notice that if I find it right there where it says line end, I could change it to an arrow, and you could kind of see the arrow that appears, which is probably what you would want for a point type of annotation. You could use an open arrow, so that's just a different style of arrow, and you could use a dot if you just want to perhaps make it a bit cleaner. So these are the 3 different types of annotations that you can do, how you can move them, rearrange them, format the actual annotation, and format the actual line ends for point and for mark annotations.